Good morning, Lakeview. Here are your announcements for this week. Make sure you stick around today after the service for the link. There's going to be snacks, and maybe you'll even meet a new friend or two.
For those ready to take the plunge, baptisms are coming up on Easter Sunday. In preparation for baptism, class will be offered on March 17th from 7 to 9 p.m. To inquire or sign up, visit the newsstand or email allison@lakeviewchurch.com.
Over the years, many people from Lakeview have supported the work of the Bridge. Now, if you're not aware, the Bridge is a Christian agency that's caring for those who are hurting in the inner city of Saskatoon. So on March 13th, we are doing a pancake brunch in support of the Bridge, and all the proceeds raised are going to go towards the good work that they're doing here in our city.
Over the last couple of months, we've been highlighting some of the prayer opportunities we have here at Lakeview. We have the Sunday Gathering prayer workers who are at the front every Sunday, as well as the telecare team. I wanted to highlight one more opportunity that we have called community prayer. This is a space where we want to gather to pray about not just our individual needs, but things that we're hearing in our community, in our city, and the world. This gathering will be taking place every second Sunday of the month, and we'll be hosting it in the atrium at 10:30. I hope to see you there.
So those are your announcements. For more information, you can always head to lakeviewchurch.com.
So here we go, Revelation. Guys, we're almost there. Like, you're making it through, right? Feels good. And like we talked about last week, we are heading into the last third of this book, where John's going to take the exact same ideas and topics: who we are, who God is, who we're called to be in the midst of the world we find ourselves in, and he breaks it out, and now we're getting this big, huge, cosmic picture. We're going to hear and see things that John has already talked about, but from a different point of view. And as we roll into this final portion of the text, it's like a combination of Lord of the Rings meets Terminator meets Pee-wee's Playhouse. Like, that is what it's going to feel like as we head from here on out. So we're going to grab chapters 15, 16, 17, and 18 this morning. I'm not going to read all of it. We're just going to grab little bits and pieces. Again, you're going to recognize some of the themes and cues that we've seen earlier. But John's going to give us some new handles to grab, some other connections to make. Now, before we hop into it this morning, I just want to relay something back to you that I keep hearing over and over again from those of you who've talked to me about the series so far. And the resounding thing is this, is that people are saying that, you know what, through this series, I feel less afraid of Revelation now. And that's a good thing. If that's the feeling that you're getting, that's good, because Revelation is good news. It's not something to be afraid of, but something to celebrate. So please keep that in mind as we walk into some very scary reading this morning. I saw another sign in heaven, huge and breathtaking, 7 angels with 7 disasters. And these are the final disasters, the wrap-up of God's wrath. And I saw something like a sea made of glass, the glass all shot through with fire, carrying harps of God, triumphant over the beast, its image, and the number of its name. The victorious one stood on the sea of glass. They sang the song of Moses, servant of God. They sang the song of the Lamb. Mighty your acts and marvelous, O God, the sovereign strong. Righteous your ways and true, King of the nations. Who can fail to fear you, God? Give glory to your name. Because you and you only are holy. All nations will come and worship you because they see your judgments are right. Now, if you've been tracking with the series, there are things there that we have heard before. First and foremost, when we talk about judgment in the scriptures, judgment is something actually to be okay with. It's actually good news. It's a sign that God cares. He cares about you and the fix we're in and the broken parts of this world. So judgment isn't a move against you or a move against me. Judgment is a move against evil and sin. And then John couples it with this idea of being victorious. So your Bible might say victorious, it might say saved, it might say conquerors. John's tying this back to something we talked about way back in Revelation 5, where he called the Lamb of God the conqueror, the victor. He's making a connection here, and he wants you and I to read between the lines and recognize that we conquer like the Lamb conquers by remaining faithful to God. So hold on. Hold on, church. Hold on, friends. Hold on. God is making a move against evil and sin. Hold on as tightly as you can. Hold on. Your rescuer is on the way. And when I read these verses earlier on in the week, what came to mind right away was a story that's been floating around the internets for the last few weeks. Have you caught it? It was a story out of Ecuador where a sloth was trying to cross a highway. Did you see these pictures on the internet this week? So here's the thing, highway going two direction. The sloth makes it halfway through and says, I'm out, and just grabs a hold of that guardrail. Look at that face. How can you not love that guy? Also, please take note that everything is dry except for that little area around the sloth, which makes you think that that poor little kid, he's scared. And I feel like this is what John is getting at in these opening verses of chapter 15. As life is speeding on both sides of you, as things appear to be out of your control, hold on. Even if it seems like your rescuer is late, he's not coming when you want him to, he's going to show up. Even if you wet yourself in the process because you are so afraid, that's okay. Hold on. Hold on as tightly as you can. Remain faithful to God and the Lamb because your rescuer is on the way and he has promised to do away with evil and sin. And he's doing it even now. So, keep watch. I come unannounced, like a thief. You're blessed if, awake and dressed, you're ready for me. Too bad if you're found running through the streets, naked and ashamed. The frog demons gathered the kings together at the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. Quick time out here, right? Remember, John is mashing up all the stories, the best and the worst of everything he knows, and now he's grabbing a bit of Hebrew history. Do you remember when frogs came out as a plague? When did that happen? They're escaping Egypt, right? Israel is getting out there. So he's tying it back to Moses, the Song of Moses. Moses, Jesus are connected. They're out of slavery. They're both rescuers. So that's going on behind the scenes. But what I found really funny about this particular passage is that there's a play on words in the Greek here. So this version says like, frog demons. Yours might say evil spirits or unclean spirits. So the literal translation for that in Greek is bad breath. Pneuma is spirit, right? Which I think is hilarious. So John is saying whatever comes out of the mouths of those little green men, it stinks. It's like halitosis. It's coffee breath from hell, literally. So anyways, I think that's super funny. It'll be on the test, or put that down on your notes. Let's continue. The seventh angel poured his bowl into the air, and from the throne into the temple came a shout, done, followed by lightning flashes and shouts, thunder crashes, and a colossal earthquake, a huge and devastating earthquake, never an earthquake like it since time began. And the great city split three ways. The cities of the nations toppled to ruin. Great Babylon had to drink the wine of God's raging anger. God remembered to give her the cup. Every island fled, and not a mountain was to be found. Hailstones weighing a ton plummeted, crushing and smashing men and women as they cursed God for the hail, the epic disaster of hail. Time out. Pull it back. Let's look at this cosmically because there's some words and terms here that have gone wild. So when you see the word or the place, Armageddon, your Bible might say Armageddon or Battle of Armageddon. It might say Megiddo or the Mount of Megiddo. John is talking about the exact same place. Now, when you and I think Armageddon, we think like missiles and tanks and destruction. When John is writing Armageddon, that's not what he has in mind. Because Armageddon is an actual physical location where a number of battles had been fought, and God's people came out on top. It was a symbol of where God went to bat and got the big win for his people. But John is not giving us the longitude and latitude of exactly where this cosmic battle is going to take place. This is not what he has in mind. Instead, what he has in mind for his first readers and now us is this. He says, turn your minds back to the place where God came through. Go back and think about the battles and the victories where God went to bat for you and you won. You came out and everything was okay. This is the connection that John is trying to make. And then he drops this line about this great city falling into three pieces. What's the great city he's been talking about this whole time? Rome, right? So is he saying that physically Rome's going to open up in an earthquake and swallow everything in? Will there be hailstones that are a ton in weight? Are they going to smash through the earth, knocking it out of its orbit? Is that what literally is going to happen? Pull it back. Cosmically, what's John saying here? John's saying something much greater and much deeper than that. He's saying that the old world, the old way of thinking, the old way of processing people and numbers, whether it's social or economic, all those systems, they're going to crash in on themselves. And John is saying that the old way of thinking, the old way of operating, the old way of doing business, the old way at looking at people socially, politically, economically, all that is being wiped away. Be careful, he says, because people have banked their lives on that. They have staked everything on the old system. So no wonder they're going to be upset. No wonder they're going to curse the sky. No wonder they're going to be angry, because they fully invested themselves into a system that God is wiping out once and for all. So in this context, John says, hold on tightly, be faithful. Remain faithful in the middle of this upheaval as the world is speeding beside you on all sides, as it seems like everything is crumbling, all the systems and the way that people have banked their lives on. When that is happening, hold on tightly. Remain faithful. So the question then, logically for you and us, is, well, how do we remain faithful when that kind of stuff is going on around us? Well, the book of Revelation and the entirety of the scriptures point to one thing, and that thing is worship. But let's not confuse what that word means. Consider this, that Christian worship is not some religious silo for our private refueling that replenishes our inner life. It's not merely some duty we observe in order to keep our eternal ducks in a row, nor is it some special sequestered experience that fills up a religious compartment in our souls, unhooked from what we do in the world Monday through Friday. Worship isn't a retreat from reality into some escapist enclave. Worship is the space in which we learn to take the right things for granted, precisely so we can bear witness to the world that is to come. Simply put, or for example, to worship is to set the people free who are holding you captive. To forgive is a form of worship. To worship means that you believe in and you work for justice even when you are currently experiencing injustice. To worship is to focus and concentrate and force yourself to believe in God, to depend on God, to be conscious of God when you feel quite capable of just taking care of yourself without God. Worship orients us to bear witness to this world that is on its way in the middle of the world and the chaos that we find ourselves in right now. Worship allows us to hold on tightly to the promise and to the peace of the Lamb, even when our world and our worlds are in chaos. But here's the challenge, folks. When you and I take these kinds of scriptures seriously, and we hold on in worship, we remain faithful to the promise and peace of the Lamb, you know what that forces us to do? It forces us to let go of all the other things we have become so used to depending on. So in this way, worship is a form of holy insecurity. And it's ludicrous. It's absurd. Because worship calls me to let go of the things that I have banked my whole life on, that I hold on so tightly to. This true and authentic worship actually signals to me the things that have become idols in my life, the things that are my go-tos for affirmation, for stability, for self-worth, and for control. And if you're anything like me, you have worked very hard to get your life in this perfect little order. You know where to go for what you need, and you hang on to those tightly, and you don't want to let anyone into your safe place. But when we take passages like this seriously, It confronts us with the reality that we cannot hold on to the Lamb and hold on to the structures of this world at the same time. Because you might remember from last week, if there is anything in your life that is a Savior that is not Jesus, then it is false, it's a sham, it's an imposter, it's not true. And what John further expands on this morning, he goes on and he says, well, guess what? You know what that is? Those other things that you are holding on to, those are the parts that are going to crumble. Those are the parts that are passing away. Those are the things people have banked their lives on that God's going to do away with once and for all. So the big questions for you and me this morning are ones like these. Where? Where do you need to hang on tightly to the promise and to the peace of the Lamb? And in doing so, what do you have to let go of? I mean, right here and right now, in order to do this with God, what do you have to do this to for the rest of your life? Where is it right now that you need to experience some holy insecurity? What are you hanging on so tightly to? What are you depending on? Are you depending on money? Is that what you're wrapped around, or is that what is wrapped around you? Maybe for some of you here this morning, you got to let that go. Is it a job? Are you hanging on super tightly to that for a number of different reasons? Has God been whispering something to you? And perhaps what I'm saying this morning, is that an affirmation that maybe that's not where you're supposed to be, and maybe you got to let that go? Is it a person? Have you banked yourself on a spouse, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a kid? Is everything wrapped up in them? Have they become your Savior in one way or another? Do you need to let go of that part of them? Or maybe it's your respectability. You've worked so hard to get your life in perfect order, and the last thing you want to do is people to look at you and say, that person doesn't have their act together. Sometimes worshiping Jesus authentically means that we look not so respectable to the rest of the world. And when you're in that spot, and everything around you is dry except for you because you are so afraid, because that's what holy insecurity does to us. Remind yourself, where's my Armageddon? Not missiles, tanks blowing up Armageddon, but Armageddon as that place, that location, that time where God took a hold of you, where he changed you, where he went to bat for you, where he won something for you, where there was a victory because he showed up in a real and tangible way. When you are afraid, remind yourself of that God has and will continue to come through for you. Now, we can ask those questions of ourselves on an individual basis, but what if we pulled them back and asked those exact same questions about us as a church community? What does Lakeview Church need to let go of in order to fully embrace the peace and promise of the Lamb? Where do we need to be insecure in a holy way, letting go of some things that perhaps aren't as important as they should be? And when things get tight and scary and worrisome, can we allow God to recharge our memory banks, make a connection and say, where have Lakeview's Armageddons been? Where have been those clear and distinct moments where God has moved and gone to bat and done good things in us and through us? So ask those questions of yourself individually, but also ask them for us collectively as a community, because part of your responsibility as a Christian is to not just look after you, but to help look after this. So if you're not thinking about your church, thinking strategically, wondering about it, praying for the future, praying for us, why not? It's one of the things that we're called to do. And there's more. One of the seven angels who carried the seven bowls came and invited me, come, I'll show you the judgment of the great whore who sits enthroned over many waters, the whore with whom the kings of the earth have gone whoring, show you the judgment on earth, dweller drunk on her whorish lust. I have never said the word whore so many times in public in a microphone, and there's more. In the Spirit, he carried me out to the desert. I saw a woman mounted on a scarlet beast, stuffed with blasphemies. The beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple scarlet, festooned with gold and gems and pearls. By the way, do not do a Google image search of Whore of Babylon. Mistake, this guy, not good. She held a gold chalice in her hand, brimming with defiling obscenities, her foul fornications. A riddle name was branded on her forehead, Great Babylon, mother of whores and abominations of the earth. I could see that the woman was drunk on the blood of God's holy people, drunk on the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Oh man, my goodness. So let's get something clear here right off the bat. John is not talking about sex or sleeping around in that way. What John is talking about is when we take something beautiful, something that is meant for good, and we abuse it. And John is still talking in terms of worship here. So let's try something out real quick here. Remember at the beginning of this series where we talked about how Revelation is really a series of political cartoons? I want to try one with you here in a second. We're not going to put the Whore of Babylon on the screen because I don't want you guys to have nightmares later on tonight, but I want you to put it here in your head real quick. First off, a little detail for history. If you were a prostitute in Rome during the time of John's writing, you would walk around with a sign on your forehead that would have your name, the favors that you were able to perform, and your price. So when John gives that description of what the Whore of Babylon is like, those are the pieces that he is putting together. Now let's put together a little political cartoon of our own. I want you to imagine this real quick. I want you to imagine what a whore or a prostitute, male or female, would look like in a cartoon setting. All right, put that in your head right now. And you're probably thinking to yourself, like we're all thinking, are those real? Now, there's more to it. The whore is not the only one in this cartoon. There's somebody else in the cartoon. The cartoon is a pimp. And the cartoon pimp in your cartoon in your mind might be in a purple suit. It's pinstripe with like big gold glasses and gold rings and a big white hat with a huge feather coming out of it. But the bad thing here, though, is that the pimp in this cartoon is you. Now begin to put the pieces together there real quick. What disturbs you more about this picture? Is it the picture of a whore whose body dimensions are slightly out of proportion? Is it because I said, are those real? Or is it because you are in this story and you are actually playing the part of the pimp? What is the most disturbing piece? Because here's the thing, folks. Sometimes we get so caught up in the whore, in her name and her price and what she can do and what she looks like, that we forget the rest of the picture and we forget the part that we play in it. So then, John throws this image in here. How is he still talking about a holy insecurity and hanging on tight and worship and faithfulness? Well, hold all that. Let's take it from a different angle here really quick to really spin this out. How many of you have ever played the game Monopoly before, right? How many of you have ever been forced to play the game Monopoly before? There you go, right? Fine. So I'm going to give you a quick tip here at church. This is awesome. It's from an article that's entitled, How to Win at Monopoly and Lose All Your Friends, which is pretty great by me. So here are the tips right here. 1, 2, 3. Step 1, acquire properties. Your goal in this portion of the game is to gain a monopoly and begin improving those properties. The earlier you can do this, the better. And a 3-property group is far superior to a 2-property group if you need to choose. Step 2, trade to acquire a monopoly on a group. It's extremely important that you do this as quickly as possible. If it means paying a stupidly high price or even giving another player a monopoly at the same time, do it. You can force the other player out later. Step 3, establishing a second monopoly and creating a housing shortage. The goal in this stage of the game is to gain a second monopoly and buy enough houses to create a housing shortage, effectively locking down the game for the other players. So as you can see in that picture, there's only a certain amount of houses. And as you know the game, you can only build a hotel if you have 4 houses. So the strategy here is buy up all the houses, never build a hotel, because what that does is it squeezes out your opponents and you beat them. So essentially what the article is saying is, if you take what other people need, you will win. So if we translate this back into real life, into what John is saying, we do the same thing sometimes. We can lock down the other players in our lives. And in those moments, you and I, we play the pimp. I'm going to do whatever I want as long as it benefits me, and I'll take from you, and I don't care where you end up as long as I have all the green little houses. And what happens from there is we just use one another. And all our interactions are just turned into transactions. I only connect with you based on what I can get from you or how I can come on top over you. And when we do that, John says in Revelation, when we selfishly take what other people need, our worship and our faithfulness go wrong. Eugene Peterson explains it like this, that worship under the aspect of the great whore is the commercialization of our great need and deep desire for meaning, love, and salvation, for the completion of ourselves and beyond ourselves. He's saying that we will collapse like Rome when our need and desire for meaning lead us away from Jesus. He's saying that we will self-destruct like evil always does when we bank our worth and our salvation on anything other than Jesus. And when we try to squeeze others out in the game of life, we are enacting violence on them. And violence comes in many different shapes and sizes. It can be military, it can be social, it can be economic. When we do those kinds of things, we are no longer worshipers of Jesus. Take the hard words like this. The Revelation's message thus combines stern criticism of military domination with equally damning words about economic exploitation and self-indulgence. To be a follower of the Lamb is to have nothing to do with either of them. So what does this mean for you and I? Well, it raises hard questions. Questions like, well, what about all that I've worked for? What about all that I've earned? What about everything that is rightfully mine? Well, Revelation and Jesus says, let it go. But what if this discipleship to Jesus bit leads us into the poorhouse? Well, then we go poor. Come on. What if a foreign country invades Canada and they try to take us over and they kill some of us? Well, then we die. And this is where being a disciple of Jesus, a follower of the Lamb, becomes awfully disturbing. Because the question it leaves us with is this: what cost are we willing to pay to our communities, to our societies, to our cities, to our families, to our kids? What cost are we actually willing to give up in order to fully follow and worship Jesus? Just 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a friend about this very thing. He said to me, if I had to choose between my kids and Jesus, I'm choosing my kids every single time. And maybe sometimes you felt the exact same way. For me, some days, on most days maybe, I can't do this. It's too hard. Everything is connected. All that I hold dear, all my systems, all my structures are all tied together in ways that if I start to give up on them, that's going to cost me something that I don't want to pay. And it's because I'm scared. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you are holding on to a lot and you don't want to let go because you are afraid of what's going to happen. And this is where worshiping Jesus and falling in line with the Lamb, this is where the rubber hits the road, because it's scary. Because the rest of the world runs on a different system. And if we don't play by those rules, we are destined to lose in that system. It'll hurt. It'll make us insecure. We'll be afraid. So maybe, just maybe, this is why John, in this last portion that we're going to read here together this morning, gives us a sneak peek on the future and how it's really all going to end. He says, and this is a bit chopped up here, guys, but ruined, great Babylon, ruined, a ghost town for demons is all that's left. A garrison of carrion spirits, a garrison of loathsome carrion birds. All nations drank the wild wine of her whoring. Kings of the earth went whoring with her. Entrepreneurs made millions exploiting her. Get out, my people, as fast as you can, so you don't get mixed up in her sins, so you don't get caught in her doom. When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. You'll notice here John is doing something that every English teacher hates. He's mixing past, present, and future tenses all into one. But this has been par for the course for John. Because remember, John's not talking chronologically, he's talking cosmically. He's not saying, well, this happened, and this will happen, and that will happen, and that will happen, well, that will happen. No, he says this. All of this is sort of happening. Oh, and it kind of happened, and it's going to happen, by the way, and he's mashing it all together. What John is doing is that he's giving us the big picture of what has happened, what is happening, and what is going to happen. So then, what is the big picture of what happens when worship goes wrong? It looks just like this. The traders will cry and carry on because the bottom dropped out of their business. No more market for their goods. Gold, silver, precious gems, pearls, fabrics of fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, perfume wood, and vessels of ivory, precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon and spice, incense, myrrh, and frankincense, wine and oil, flour and wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots, and slaves. Their terrible traffic in human lives. Friends, when worship goes wrong, there is a body count. And look at the list that John is putting together. He's putting spices and metals and woods and whatever else on par with human lives. This is what happens when worship goes wrong. When we end up worshiping these other idols, we actually become slaves to them. And actually, they end up doing us in at the end. Because slavery in John's day is akin to what oil and gas and steam and electricity and nuclear power is to us in our age. Slavery is just a consumable resource. It's a means to an end with no value outside of what it can produce or what we can use it for. So when you and I start to think in that way, putting all those things on par, when we think that way as communities and as societies, then people, human beings, become slaves and they become expendable. And that, friends, is the way of the prostitute and not the way of the bride. That, friends, is the way of the dragon and not the way of the lamb. So may we this morning declare our full dependence on Jesus and hold on tightly, no matter how fast the traffic is on both sides of us. But in that, may we recognize that as we hold on tightly to Jesus, our worship is going to cause us to let go of the other things that we have found to give us stability in life. And in that, that's going to make us insecure. And if you're insecure in that way, it's okay. You're on the right path, but count the cost, Jesus says. It's going to cost you everything. So then, be careful. Don't live a self-preserving life where you are the pimp, just using the prostitute for whatever you need so that you can get at Park Place. That's the old system. That's the old way of thinking. God is wiping that away once and for all. That's not the way we roll. That's worship gone wrong. When we squeeze the life out of other people, when we collect all the resources selfishly to make sure that we're good and make sure that they lose. And remembering that when we do that as a whole, as a group of people, it's a synchronized compromise where human beings become slaves and they become nothing more than expendable products. But you and I, friends, us, we are meant for a better way.